don't like what you did in the UK, we're standing in solidarity with them, and this is simply
we don't like what you're doing here.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that this is a deliberate attempt to stir up a new Cold War. Only you don't have the Reds under the beds this time because they're no longer red. They're as capitalist as any other leading country in this side of the world. But Fine Gael has really got little interest in matters of real importance where Russia has been accused of torturing the LGBT community. Vladimir Putin is a real thug who allows no internal dissent politically. And look at their record in Syria in particular. And they never said a dicky word about that. But now they're all hot under the collar because Theresa May came into a meeting and said, look, here's the evidence. But none of us have heard the evidence or know what it's about. We do know that the particular gas that poisoned these individuals is produced in Uzbekistan, and Uzbekistan is linked to NATO. Now, we are not shouting and roaring for the evidence, but rather we want to make the political point that this is about an expression of the European Union of solidarity with Theresa May's Tory government, who, by the way, have taken significant donations from Russian oligarchs, something like 15 million sterling in donations from Russian oligarchs. But then we allowed the Russian oligarchs to launder up to 130 billion.
Right, and I do want to get onto the money trail as well, but your point about Uzbekistan being linked to NATO, are you suggesting that NATO was somehow involved in
No, I'm not. I'm just
attack?
saying that the evidence is pretty poor that we know of about that this is actually linked to Russia. But let's say in all probability it was Russia. Why are we now getting hot under the collar about an incident in Sainsbury or Salisbury that has little or nothing to do with this state, except that it pushes us more into an EU-wide pact of military and security cooperation across the EU? And the EU is sending out this, no matter what happens after Brexit, we're all in solidarity together in terms of our security and military policy, and we're all going to gang up on Russia. Now, there's lots of reasons to gang up on Russia, but this just isn't sufficiently good enough. And I think it's very, very dangerous.
All right, and Evan has texted in.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. You're making this up as you go along.
I'm not, Brid.
There has been not a single utterance
matter
from the leaders across Europe about Syria and the LGBT community in Moscow or otherwise. This is not what this is about.
That was my opinion. That was my opinion. That I was agreeing.
Exactly.
No, that I was agreeing with you. I'm not suggesting
me,
that
but
this
you're
is
saying
that.
we are not doing this in unison over those issues. If we
we're not.
I would be congratulating the Taoiseach if we were. When you say self-interest, what happened in this country when 34 people lost their lives in the Dublin Monaghan bombings? And it was very clear that the British security were involved in that. And since then, they have refused to release the files on it. Dáil committees have been set up. I'm a member of one that is trying to pressurise British security to release the files on the Dublin Monaghan bombings.
You're not conflating like with like
We do nothing
all.
to the British diplomats in this country in order to get to the truth of what happened to our own citizens.
We took the British to the Court of Human Rights
we dismissed,
over a whole variety
and by
of
the way, the one time we did dismiss a diplomat over the Israeli killings, I didn't interrupt you. When we did, I listened to you. However,
all right.
When we did dismiss a driver or a security man in the Israeli embassy, it was after two long investigations, one by the Gardaí and the other by the Department of Foreign Affairs. We jumped as soon as Leo sat in.
What evidence?
As soon
Brid,
as
would you like to share the evidence
Sorry,
with me?
will you let me finish? As soon as Leo sat in at the EU committee, jump. We will expel diplomats. Great. Now you're trying to compare what we did there with what we did in the past. My point is that this is beyond the pale. This is beyond the pale. It is endangering us. It is pushing us into an alliance with aggressors across Europe, and it has no place in Irish society. And I think we should pull back from it now and stop all this, the Russians are coming nonsense. If people
They're already here.
Yeah, and if countries want to spy on each other, they don't have to be physically here.
But what about our duty to our own
How did the
country?
Americans spy on Germany? Yeah. They tapped Angela Merkel's phones and computers. There is new ways of doing spying, and they're all
we are very exposed. Let me tell you that.
We're very exposed.
I want to hear from Niall Collins, and then I want to hear from Tim
Just to make a
Lambert.
point, and I agree with Declan, we are exposed, and we have, is it 8 of the 10 top tech multinationals who are headquartered here in Ireland.
Ireland should have done nothing here, that we should have turned our back on the UK, the EU, and said, all of you go off ahead without us. We're going to stand aside. This isn't our war.
Ireland should have acted when tens of thousands of people, and they still are, by the way, were being bombed to bits and gassed to bits by Russian hardware during the Syrian war. Ireland should act over the mistreatment of the LGBT community. But Ireland is acting, and Leo Varadkar committed to acting as soon as he heard whatever he heard from Theresa May. And he said, we will expel diplomats, before any investigation or before any evidence was really understood by anybody.
But do you think that we shouldn't have acted in this case?
We shouldn't have acted in this case. No, we should not.
And you wouldn't have any fears that we'd be left isolated within Europe, that we could damage ourselves with our relationship with the UK,
which we would.
That perhaps if something was to happen here in the future, that we might find we have less friends than we would like.
Well, Sarah, let me put it to me the other way around, that we are more likely to be targets of something in the future because we've lined up in solidarity with imperial powers who are actually trying to reconstruct a new Cold War, and they're putting themselves onside each other in order to vie for competition about who controls resources and going forward who's going to be the big boys across Europe. This is what this is about. It's no different to the imperial powers shaping up when Wikipeedia's being pulled out of incubus in order to justify the invasion of Kuwait, and it was discovered later on that it wasn't true at all.
All right. So we're back to the proof and evidence.
Yes,
all right.
There is one point though, and I think Brid
as a party does need to change, but that doesn't stop the debate happening, and that doesn't stop people having their papers and having a view out there. And I think it's a healthy sign that we sit down and take analysis of where we're going, because the world is changing. We've seen that from the Cold War to where we are now. It's a very, very changing place.
That's fair enough, Brid, isn't it? I mean, because there's been a lot of criticism of Fine Gael and the MEPs in particular for publishing that policy paper, but they're just opening up a debate.
Well, no, I think it's very much connected with an attempt to align us much more clearly with the European military powers. And it started with the PESCO debate in the Dáil. They wanted to pass the PESCO motion without any debate whatsoever. We had to have a big fight to get a debate in the Dáil. And now that we've joined PESCO, we're committed to increasing our defence budget to 2% of GDP, which is like doubling it, or more than doubling it.
From a very low base, though.
From a very low base, but we also have some of the poorest defence forces in Europe. They call the Rathmines Barracks Hotel Rwanda. It's so badly equipped, and we're not even talking about increasing the pay and the living conditions of the defence forces,
and there's
whom we're very proud of.
Tim wants to come back in there.
Whom we're very proud of for the work they've done in the Mediterranean and during the climate chaos.
All right, Tim.
Surely
that was precisely the distraction. Look at 2040. Don't look here. Don't look now. Don't look at the crowded buses, the gridlock cities. Don't look at the trolley crisis or the housing crisis. Look over there. And that was the whole point of the unit. And it's a good thing that it's gone.
All right. I think that is all that we have time for.
That you should have a 2/3 majority to vote on an aspect of women's reproductive health. What other aspect of legislation are they looking for a 2/3 majority on? None whatsoever. Even when it comes to expelling diplomats or aligning ourselves with military powers, we don't get to vote on these things. But a 2/3 majority to discuss and legislate on an issue of women's health, it's an outrageous claim from Simon Coveney. But of course, I do believe he did know that the Constitution wouldn't allow it. And one thing I've learned since I've become a member of the Dáil is that for an awful lot of TDs, it's all about optics rather than about honesty. And he wants it on the record that he tried to get this legislation more copper fastened for the future, because one of the arguments that the anti-choice lobby keep making is that if we allow this go through, it's going to get worse and worse, and we'll have the most liberal abortion regime forever and a day on the planet. And this is one of the arguments they're using to try and convince the population not to repeal the 8th Amendment. And I think we have to stop faffing around. We made a commitment to the Irish people. We'd give them a referendum. We need to name the date, get on with the campaign, and whatever Simon Coveney wants to campaign or believe in, I don't really give a damn. I know what I want to campaign on and believe in. I want to campaign for women to have a choice, to stop the barbarity that's been forced on us for decades, and to give young people in particular a chance to vote on their future, their bodies, their lives.
Can I just pick up on the point there that